All right, we are recording. Welcome to the April 20th, 2021 Boise ITSM Talks Meeting. We're pleased to have those of you here with us today, and for those of you watching the recording as well. We'll go ahead and get started. And first of all, I like to always say thank you for all of our attendees for taking time out of your day to attend our virtual meeting. Don't think we have any first timers here so far today, but we are expecting some, so hopefully they'll make it in and we'll be able to join. Josh and Chris, it's great to have you here with us today. And of course, thanks to Brian for taking the time out of his schedule and for presenting at our session today. Very much appreciate him being here. I always like to start off our meetings with a little bit of a conversation around our purpose and our why and our vision. And as we've formed this local interest group now since November of 2017, we really like to differentiate ourselves from a lot of the other groups in a couple of ways. We like to have presentations and always try and talk to our presenters to give actionable information and things that people can go away and take away from the presentation and try and implement or do something different in their organizations. The other thing that we like to do is to try and encourage attendee participation. We'll definitely have some time during the meeting today for some discussion, for some Q&A. And also, as we are switched to being more virtual, one of the things that we used to do, and Chris will know this, is we like to try and start off our meetings, the following meeting, to ask if anyone in the audience has anything that they want to share from what they learned from the previous month's presentation. And I want to try and start doing that again. So for our attendees who are here today, as well as those maybe listening to the recording, when we have our next month's meeting, I'm going to start asking for some participation on what you were able to learn from maybe some of the things you took away from one of the previous meetings and what you were able to implement. And for our last meeting where we had our panel on practice versus process, I suspect there's definitely some interesting takeaways. And I know for Brian and for Josh, they were just exposed to ITIL 4 foundation class from me this last week. And we talked about the difference between a practice and a process a little bit. And it'll be fun to start doing that type of reporting out again. I won't put anybody on the spot today, but in the future, I definitely encourage all of you to participate and share some of your lessons learned or share some of the things you're able to take away from our previous meetings. And of course, our why for starting the group is to inspire everyone to become better leaders. We want to take a look at ITSM and related frameworks as ways to help straighten out the curve to success and to get from A to B faster, and to apply that from a leadership perspective. And whether you're a current leader in an organization, whether you're an aspiring leader, whether you're an informal leader, everyone has this chance to step up and to fill that void and to be the voice of positive change. And we want to encourage everyone to please go ahead and look for opportunities to do that and to share again with our group on what's working for you, what's not working for you. Always welcome opportunities for folks to present in future meetings. Okay, I'm going to turn sharing over to Brian and have him start with his presentation. Again, welcome to Brian Jennings. He's delivering his presentation called Stories from the Inside, How to Make the Most of Your Software Vendor Relationships. I'll go ahead and stop sharing, Brian. Let me make sure you've got the permissions to share, which you should have now, and I'll have you go ahead and kick us off.
All right. Okay, should see the presentation.
Yep, we're seeing it.
All right. Great, yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for attending or watching the recording. So yeah, I'm kind of new to the group and new to really to kind of the whole ITIL and IT kind of world, I guess you could say. My background is primarily in software vendor product management. And so when I talked to Jeff about presenting, I thought that maybe I could talk about my experience with software and give you some kind of an inside perspective to potentially give you some ideas about how to improve your relationships with your vendors and make the most out of them through that insight. So
Hey, Brian, real quick before you get going, we're seeing kind of a dual screen share instead of just your main slides. We're kind of seeing your speaker notes and some of those other pieces. For the recording, would you mind just can you blow up just the main slide? That might make it easier for people to see.
How's that?
Perfect. That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. Great. All right. So as an overview, it's kind of a broad topic. So it took me a while to kind of hopefully come up with a good way to go through this that'll be useful and interesting. But I'm first going to just kind of go over my background and give you an idea of what I've done in the world of software. And then I broke it up into 4 sections. The first focusing on communication with your vendors, talking about some of the key users and personas that you likely interact with, and give you some insight into how those people, how you might, I guess, improve your communication, what you can expect out of them, and so on. And then transition into talking about the vendor resources and kind of talk about whether or not, I guess, bring that or highlight how those may be more valuable to you or what may be available. And then into product roadmap and value co-creation, kind of using the ITIL language there. Spend some time talking about ideas around how you can influence the vendor in terms of the roadmap and partner with them to get with that goal of the co-creation of obviously benefiting you by having a better product, and then how it can help them as well. And then finally, talk a little bit about marketing. This is around vendor marketing. You'll see what I mean with that once we get to that section. Okay. All right. So to start with, my background is in product management. I've spent over 15 years in the software industry as a product manager. And this is the Pragmatic Framework to give you an overview of what that means and what I've done. I've been through their training a couple times. I've been certified. And this is kind of the value chain, product manager value chain. And going from left to right, the way that they've structured this is the left is strategy, the right is execution, kind of starting with that high-level business case. What is the market? What are you trying to solve for a customer? And then going through the process of researching and building a solution, and then enabling and going to market with that solution, and then supporting it once it's out and once customers are using it. So kind of pause there and just give you an opportunity to kind of skim through this and see all the different things that are involved from the product manager perspective. And this is the view I have had. Now I'm switching over to an overview of the companies I've worked for. So the first one is Micron Computers. That's where I started. They're not a software company, but I started there as a tech writer, and then started at Cougar Mountain after that as the documentation specialist there, documenting their software, which is accounting ERP software for small business. And in this case, this was long enough ago that it was still physically shipped in CDs and shrink wrapped boxes and software to the user. And that was the model for Cougar Mountain at that time. So I spent many years there, and that's where I got started in product management. And then I moved to a company called CounselLink, which is with LexisNexis. And this is a legal billing solution, what I would describe as kind of a first generation SaaS product. And they provided legal billing and matter management to corporate legal departments in corporations. And then I moved into a job at Financial Force, which is more of a modern SaaS environment or technology stack. This is an ERP and professional services automation product entirely built on top of the Salesforce platform. And then I spent about 4 years there, and then got an opportunity to join Zenify. This brought me back to Boise. And I spent a year as a consultant working with them, providing implementation, automation, and customization services around the Salesforce platform. And then got the opportunity to join Oracle, and there as a principal product manager on their Fusion Cloud ERP product portfolio, where I focused mostly on the projects and professional services automation application that they provided. And then now I have founded Riddian Consulting, providing technical consulting around Salesforce, Financial Force products. And then I'm also working on some solutions around product management and helping product managers with, I guess, be more effective on the Salesforce platform. So in addition to all these different software companies, this is really the broad spectrum in terms of customers that I've worked with. Cougar Mountain was small business, but then going into counseling and Financial Force, and of course, Oracle, working with businesses of all sizes and all types across the spectrum. All right. So the first section to talk about is vendor communication. Are you talking to the right people at the right time? So the picture you're looking at is pretty, I guess, about 20 years old now. And this was from a PR stunt that Salesforce did early in their life cycle. And this was their early positioning and marketing, was all around getting rid of software, going to SaaS. This was actors hired to do kind of a faux protest against software. And one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this with this group is how to kind of bring up or talk about how the dynamic between vendors and customers has really changed. And a lot of this change was driven by the impact of SaaS. But then there's the technical changes, but also a lot of it, I think Salesforce led the way in this, just a change in the mindset of how vendors would go to market and how they would sell products. And one of the big things that they did with this approach, in addition to trying to kind of present this value of getting rid of the need and the pain and the cost of maintaining software, it allowed them to change how they went to market. They no longer had to go through IT. They could go directly to, in their case, the sales VP or the sales leader and sell the product to them. And that customer then just logs in online. IT doesn't have to be involved at all. Now, over time, I think that there's companies have realized that that's not entirely accurate, that IT still plays a very critical role. And I think correctly has kind of reversed course in a lot of ways. And this is part of the reason that you don't see Salesforce pushing this messaging anymore. But it still has the legacy impact of changing that dynamic, and the AE, of how the AE and how vendors are communicating with their market and with their customers. And basically, like I said, really focusing on the business value and not as much of a focus on IT as maybe in the old days before SaaS, when they were a key part. They had to go through IT to get the product into a customer. But one thing to keep in mind, of course, is that the AE and a vendor is motivated almost 100% by new business. That's new customers or new revenue. And they, like with Salesforce, I think this is the trend, and is that they're really going to talk about business value. I remember a meeting once with one of the top salespeople at Financial Force, sitting down with him, talking to a customer for an hour. And in that entire time, they didn't talk about the product once. And as a product manager, product person, I was kind of taken aback by that. But that is a lot of how these vendors work now. Again, they want to talk about how they can help a customer make money and not worry about the features or the technology, which, frankly, a lot of AEs are going to be a little uncomfortable with that conversation. But then they do have a solution engineer that comes in with the product expertise. And even with that, they're really focusing on kind of giving you a vision of what the product can do, which often creates a gap when you actually try to implement the software and find out that it doesn't necessarily line up to the way you want to use the software as much as you hoped. But again, if you have a scenario where there's an opportunity for revenue, new products or add-on products, then the AE can be very helpful to work with on that. However, one thing to know, which I think is an interesting thing, is that the AEs are often very protective of their communications and their customers, even to the point, and I saw this a lot in my career, that inside a customer as a product person, I often had to try to overcome the objections of AEs to try to reach out and contact customers directly. So I think that's a good thing to kind of be aware of and understand that if you're having discussions with an AE, it doesn't necessarily get deeper into the company in terms of talking about the feature, functionality, things like that. If you think that you're telling the AE what you want the product to do, and that's getting to the product team, that may not be something that's happening, because typically the AE is not that motivated to communicate product gaps unless they lose a deal. So if the customer doesn't buy their product, then they're going to go complain about the product needing new functionality. But if you are a customer, they're not necessarily going to be putting much effort into communicating your feedback as far as improving the company. It's not always the case, but the main reason I bring that up is that if you want to get that feedback, you may need to look at different channels. And one thing I thought about, actually just crossed my mind in the ITSM meeting last week, is the potential, because of this dynamic in which the AEs are focusing on talking to leaders in your company and selling the value. One thing that you might have an opportunity to do is connect and build a relationship with the AE for the purpose of getting them to help get buy-in, internal buy-in, right? So potentially talk to an AE if it makes sense about what you want to accomplish in the company and what you're trying to do with technology. And then they may leverage those relationships they have to sell your internal leaders. So kind of an interesting approach that could be worth exploring to see if there's an opportunity there. In some ways, it's kind of turning that negative in the sense that they're bypassing IT into a positive, and that they can become an ally. And then the next one to highlight is customer support. So as you know, this is kind of a break-fix relationship in communication. It's very tactical. You're rarely talking to the same people, so you're not building relationships with your support people. And the software vendor is very motivated to scale when it comes to this resource or these individuals. So they want to be able to go 2x, 5x, 10x, 100x in terms of customers without increasing their support costs. So that gives them, so that means there's a lot of incentive for them to make this efficient, to help you, but to do it quickly and effectively, and go on to the next customer. So, vendor to vendor, there's going to be a lot of variation in how effective and how much value you're going to get out of their support. And this is part of the reason some vendors are going to solve this problem by just offering upgrade options to get better support. So they can't figure out a way to keep it to scale properly. So they just start charging more if you want more support to get revenue to go with it. However, like as we talked about with the kind of evolution, this is another role that's kind of evolved or has risen out of the transition to the SaaS model. So before the SaaS model, the incentive and with the vendor was always selling the product. I remember one meeting in particular in which we were talking about product, and this is a long time ago, we were talking about product enhancements, and I can't remember if it was me or someone else, but someone brought up features or functionalities needed for the end user to make the product more usable. And the executive shut that down really quickly, saying that they could care less about the end user. All they cared about was the buyer. And I think that's an example of the mindset that a lot of people in software used to have, and you've likely experienced, where they have a lot of feature function, they sell the product, and once they sell it, because it's installed, because there's that vendor lock-in kind of model in the old way software was managed, then customers were stuck with it and they had to make do. In contrast, you get to SaaS and the subscription model, and it's much easier for customers to leave if they're not happy with how the product is working. So that changed the mindset, and they started to see that there's a gap. The salesperson, of course, is very helpful in getting it sold, and then the support's there when something breaks, but they needed to give more attention to their customers to make sure they're happy, so they renew and continue being customers, watching churn. So that brings in the customer relationship manager. So they're going to be more proactive. They're going to reach out, make sure you're happy with the software. But again, the scale issue is still there. They're going to likely be spread thin, but they're often also responsible for renewals. Again, keeping the AE focused on new business, new revenue. So that takes me to the next section, which is actually before that, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the overall view of the org structure. This is it's not meant to be an org chart in terms of individuals, but teams. The typical software company, you have your C-suite, you have marketing, sales, engineering, product, and support. And what you see in these arrows is often the kind of communication that can happen where IT is interacting with the VP of sales or the user, and the vendor is trying to reach out to those people through support or through the AE channels, but not as much direct interaction with IT. And that's where I think one of the things that you can do to improve that relationship is try to build more channels for communication. And sometimes, like I mentioned, that might be difficult. The salesperson may not want that. They want to be able to control the conversation. But when you do have that upgrade option, that can be one thing that you can work on with them, is getting those contacts and getting those relationships to have more channels to communicate with the vendor. And this takes me to vendor resources. This is something I've seen a lot, that I say that I see a lot of customers that don't necessarily take advantage of all the resources a vendor provides. Like we talked about, through all those communication channels with sales and support, vendors have a lot of incentive to control those costs. And one of the ways that they do that is by providing resources for customers to help themselves. And as a result, they often have a lot available to help out. And as I mentioned, I think a lot of times it seems like customers don't necessarily take advantage of this resource. So there's going to be help, but in addition to the help with the software, you'll find training, different Q&A, also online communities. This is a big thing a lot of vendors are providing these days, that allow you to get more access to content, but also to communicate with other users to find out how they're taking advantage of the vendor's products and services. And then, of course, as I mentioned, they're going to have opportunities to upgrade, to buy more support, to work with consultants and partners as well. And then the user group is the other thing to highlight. The ability to find people or groups around a vendor that are not provided by the vendor as another great resource. So you have the support, but then relying on those resources and taking advantage of that is something I highly encourage. There may be a lot more than you realize. All right. So now we move into the next section, which is around the product roadmap and value co-creation, something that's a very big topic in ITIL, which is, I think, a great idea. So I'm going to talk about it in that, try to talk about it in that framework. So obviously what you want to do with your vendor is you want them to enhance the product in a way that's going to add functionality and features that you can use and that can benefit your company. But then when you think about co-creation, it's good to think about what the vendor wants, or how they get value out of that relationship. You're giving them feedback on how to change the product to help you, but that's obviously the value you get. What's the value they get? And that brings me to kind of a lens that vendors look through. And based on my experience, it feels like there's often difficulty. It causes kind of a disconnect with customers because of it. So as an IT manager and a customer at a business, you're thinking about and looking at technology through the lens of your business. You're looking up and you're seeing your business and working through how to take advantage of technology, whereas your vendor is looking at a market. They're seeing you in the context of all of the businesses that are their customers, or that their prospective market. And that colors the way that they think about things. And I think that can cause, in some cases, a disconnect. An example that comes to mind is many times in my career that customers would ask for functionality, and sometimes they would present it as if this is functionality that they don't know why we didn't have it to start with, that they're not anything special, that this is the way everybody does business, and why don't we have this functionality? But then from the product perspective of the vendor, I knew from my experience that, in fact, there was something unique about the way they did things that wasn't as pervasive as they thought. And so sometimes that would create sometimes a disconnect between a customer and a vendor. So the main thing I think about in terms of highlighting that is just to keep that in mind when you communicate with your vendor. And I think that can help you be more effective in your communication. So they're going to have, this is an example again from Salesforce. They have an idea forum, and a lot of companies, a lot of vendors will have something like this. And if they do, definitely take advantage of it. Vendors do use these and rely heavily on them to help prioritize product roadmap. One thing that you see year by year, one of the top issues that product managers bring up in surveys is the challenge of getting good customer and market feedback to prioritize roadmaps. So they're hungry for that kind of feedback, and that's where you're looking to get the value by getting functionality you want, but part of the value they get is they get feedback and validation and data to help them make better decisions about what they prioritize. So one thing that can be helpful is keeping that in mind and thinking about how you can communicate effectively with them. And this is something that I wanted to highlight in terms of thinking about how you communicate, and things that I think can help you be more effective and help you be more, help your feedback be more, I guess, adopted, I guess, influential, and readily accepted. So on the right, I have some thoughts about things to potentially avoid versus things to do. So one thing that I would see a lot is customers giving feedback in the context of a functionality. So, which kind of makes sense, right? You have a vendor, they have software. I want your software to do this, X, Y, or Z, right? And that makes sense. But from the product perspective, when I see that kind of feedback, the first thing I think about is, okay, I see what they're asking for in terms of feature function, but now I'm going to have to go back and do research because I have to understand what the business problem is around why they need that feature or function. And there are multiple reasons for that. One is just from the perspective of good design. I want to understand the context so I can make sure we design a feature and function that's going to be effective. But the other reason is prioritization. And so having that ability to see, is this feature, if I build it, is it going to apply to a large number of my customers, right? And I'm not necessarily going to know that by the feature. So that helps me with that. And it helps me also to come up with a feature that's going to apply to multiple customers. So again, the first thing is that by having that context, I see that feature, it jumps forward in my process automatically because now I don't have to go do that research to even move it into my backlog to consider for the product. And then related to that, I think another thing that is helpful is just being available to offer additional follow-up. Again, it's easy, I think, to overlook the complexity of what the vendor is trying to accomplish and think that it's self-evident, right? And kind of not expect them to need or want additional insight or input. So making yourself available and helping them get all of the information they need, which is related to the next point, which is the value of connecting them directly to the end user or the business person. So one thing I've seen a lot is when we get feedback from IT teams, they often are very helpful and we'll follow up with them. But I'm looking for I guess nuanced feedback or asking a lot of detailed questions about the business case, the user case, and IT can often answer a lot of it, but not get into some of the nuance or the detail that I need. And if the IT person doesn't help connect me directly to the user, then it makes it more difficult to get what I need. So just keeping that in mind and thinking about how you can help facilitate that connection directly with the end user or the business user. And the final thing for roadmap that I would highlight or emphasize is that as a customer, not to be tempted, which it's very tempting to do, but never to plan or base your plans or your strategy or projects on future features. Now, there could be some exceptions if you have signed contracts with a vendor to provide something, then that's different. But if you don't have an actual physical contract, just being very cautious. And I would say whenever you decide a plan for IT, you really look at what the vendors offer today and do everything around that. Even if you're talking to a vendor, even if the vendor's saying this is a top priority, the complexity of that is such that I've seen too many times that two things can happen. One is all the different demands and requirements on their capacity are going to impact what they do. And again, even if they have a feature that's a high priority, that they agree with you, it's not a question of you having a high value and them not being a high value for them and for their market. It can still be something that just gets pushed out and pushed out and pushed out, right? So then if you make plans and you hold off on something or start working on something, assuming that feature is going to come out, it's just going to cause problems. The other thing that can happen, and this is kind of a byproduct of an agile mindset, is a lot of times a vendor is going to look at an MVP. So they're talking about releasing something that you plan on taking advantage of, but they release it and you get it and you try to implement it and find out that it's still missing some things. And sometimes this is there's good things about that, right? It's creating that iterative feedback loop. So you get it, you provide feedback, they make enhancements, and then you get a great feature. But the point being that when they release it, you may find out that it's not complete and doesn't have everything you need. So if you're making a lot of plans and assumptions based on that, you're going to find yourself, kind of digging out of that problem. All right. So that goes through roadmap. And the final piece here that I wanted to highlight, which I've seen, which is kind of an interesting one, is talking about marketing and talking about how your software vendor could potentially make you a star. And this is really in the context primarily of you having a vendor that you've implemented, that you've seen a lot of benefits and value from them. Because if you do, and if you've had that experience, vendors are hungry for customer validation. They can have the best product in the market. They can have, and it can be clear, not and easy for them to communicate and to articulate. But the reality is, and that they know, is they can say anything they want. Prospects are going to kind of give it a, listen to it and be like, yeah, because they, it's kind of taken with a grain of salt, so to speak, right? So they really need that customer validation. They can say their product's the greatest thing in the world, but then they need to follow it up with a customer to say, look, we're not just saying it, but these customers have done it, right? So because of that, they have huge value and are very motivated to work with you, to promote you and to promote your company as part of their marketing. And they're going to do that through case studies, through webinars, invite you to be on panels, present in conferences, virtually or in person when those are coming back, invite you on customer advisory boards, things like this. And if that happens, I have a kind of a case study based on my time frame in Financial Force. This is an extreme one, but I've seen it at smaller scale, similar kind of dynamics. So in my time at Financial Force, Burberry was a company that they highlighted a lot. They did a lot of marketing materials. On the right, you see a video they created, a marketing material. On the left, you see it, them with Burberry on stage at some of their biggest conferences. And so we see this all over. There are other companies as well. But there was a lot of kind of lifting up and presenting this customer. And I think about, when you think about yourself and where you are in your company and your career, and this is something that could help you, right? Like if your peers or your leaders in your company see that you're speaking on events about the future of IT, or where IT is going, or how you're leveraging IT, then that's potentially going to help lift your profile, right? And so then a few years into this happened, which I thought really caught my attention, right? So this is the same woman, Angela is her name. She was hired by Apple to lead up their retail office, their retail stores and the retail side of the business, and offered a pay package of $73 million for the first year, $170 million over the 5 years. And you see in the third bullet, one of the key things they pointed out in bringing her in is that she was renowned for her canny social media and web presence, right? And I just couldn't help but wonder, how much did her collaboration with Salesforce open the door for this opportunity for her, right? And I've seen this again with a lot of people I've worked with in the industry, where they come in, a software vendor does a lot of work to promote them because the benefit they get, and then within a year, 6 months or a year, I see that they get promoted or get a new job at another company that's a move forward in their career. So I think that is something that may be overlooked, is how motivated they are to work with you in a lot of cases, and that there's potentially a lot of value to you personally and professionally by working with the vendor. Again, co-creation. All right. So the final piece was something Jeff recommended that I really liked, was to highlight some kind of actions items, things that you can do based on what I discussed, to think about I guess, get some of these benefits that we talked about. So the first one is looking at your contacts with your vendors, who you're talking to, and then asking yourself if those are the contacts that are going to get what you need, or if you want to try to get more contacts, more access to the product team, for example. That's one thing I'd highly recommend. And then the other thing is spending a little time looking at all the resources your vendors provide. Are you taking full advantage of what they offer? So taking a little time to look at that, document it, and just make sure that you're taking full use of everything they have to offer, including the online forums that they don't create as well. And then looking at what options they have for providing feedback, if they have a forum, making sure you're taking advantage of that, feeding them information. But then also I would recommend trying to figure out ways to make connections with people on their product teams to build a relationship there, to provide that feedback, which has a lot of benefits. You get access to these people who are going to have, you know, the product experts in the company, that even if you don't get some of the functionality you want, that you're going to get insider access to stuff they're working on. You're going to be able to influence the design and be connected with people that are, you know, the experts of the product. So a lot of potential benefits from that effort. And then the final piece with the marketing, if you have used products effectively, then, you know, could you put together some summaries of what you've accomplished with some metrics? Reach out to the vendor, try to get in contact with marketing, and see if there are some opportunities for co-marketing there and promotion. All right. So that's it. I wanted to try to keep it on the shorter side to allow time for discussion. So, so definitely let me know if this sparked any ideas, and I'm interested in hearing people's thoughts about things they've done with vendors, or some, if you have questions to me about something I didn't cover that you've often wondered about your software vendors, I'm happy to talk about that.
All right, first off, Brian, thank you very much for presenting. I found your recommendations very valuable and the whole presentation very informative. And I'm really happy that I recorded this. I think this is the type of presentation that you could look at and think about more than one time. And for those of you that are here, and as well as for those of you that are watching the recording, I think this is the type of a presentation that if you share it with the right people in your organization, it can really make a positive difference to consider what Brian has shared and what he has learned from his experience in working in the product marketing and product management space. And I appreciate you doing that, Brian. Does anyone have any questions or comments regarding Brian's presentation? I'll have you go ahead and unshare real quick, Brian, so I can reshare my announcements here in a second. But I'll go ahead and open it up in case anyone in the group has any questions that they would like to ask Brian, or any experiences they perhaps want to share about what they've done from their vendor relationships and any lessons learned. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to share, or any comments?
I'd like to ask a question if I could. Brian, one of the things that you said that I thought was almost goes without saying, as it were, but it's a fantastic idea, and that is when you're going and giving that feedback and basically putting in those feature requests to a vendor, to attach that with some sort of business context.
Yeah,
as you said, somewhat of like a business case or something of that nature that says, hey, this feature is relevant to me, but perhaps also relevant to others.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that before? Has someone brought a well-built, basically a business reason, almost like a business case, or to what level of detail that somebody inside of the company would say, this is obviously compelling, and we need to take this feature request and put it at the top of the list, or something of that nature? What do those things look like?
It's a good question. I think that the main thing is to describe the context. So what they look like is they're talking about the scenario separate from the technology, right? Like, so I'm trying to think of a quick example. So let's say in the context of Salesforce, which is a CRM, I don't know if that's a good example, but basically they say like, okay, my salesperson is, they're trying to make sales, but they struggle because they don't have good insight into, I guess the goals of the customer, the personas or something like that. And so they need functionality to help better identify and prioritize people in their pipeline. So that's an example, right? Like the salesperson needs to prioritize. They need to understand people in their pipeline, the leads, which ones are the best fit for what they're trying to sell, as an example. And if they can do that, then they can increase their sales, because now they're focusing on the deals that are more likely to close, and increase revenue by 40% or something like that, right? So that's kind of giving you the business context, versus saying something like, yeah, when we have a lead come in, we need to know what industry it's in. And so could we have a feature where we can put the industry on it or something like that, right? So that's maybe the feature, but then you have none of that context. And if I'm looking at that as a product manager by itself, I'm like, okay, that's nice. They want to have a new field. So what, right? But if it's in the bigger context and I'm like, oh, okay, this is something that if we can solve this, then customers are going to see an increase in revenue, right? So that's something that I can not only sell internally to prioritize on the roadmap and get buy-in, but then I'm thinking also about going to market. This is a feature that I can go to market with and make my product more attractive. So it's really, I think that's probably the main thing I would say is set aside the software and start by talking about the business value of what they're doing. And I think that's really, really can be really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. Have you been on the receiving end of any like really good, they're almost like feature pitches, I would think almost.
Yeah.
Like instead of a feature request, this is somebody pitching for you to build something that's going to help their business be better. Have you been on the receiving end of a really good pitch?
From a customer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like I said, I think a good pitch is they do a good job of connecting to the value. This is something that I think is often brought up in ITIL, which I think is something that really jumped out to me. But I think the main thing is like, what is the business value, and trying to connect it back to dollars and cents, right? So how is like, what is the financial impact of this problem? Am I trying to increase sales, reduce costs? If so, how much? How painful is this? Is there risk involved? Is this something that if I get it wrong, I risk IRS coming after me? As an example, I'm thinking of RevRec as a scenario. If you don't do your revenue recognition properly, there can be legal implications, right? So setting that stage of the pain that's involved with what I'm trying to do. So I think when I see a good pitch, they start by talking about that. What's the business problem, and creating and describing it in a way that I can connect it to the financial impact of the business. And then from there, going back from there and talking about how the feature function of the software would solve that. I mean, I think hopefully that's helpful. I mean,
I no, absolutely, for sure. I think it is. I mean, I've been on the other end of those relationships by wondering why these vendor relationships that I'm told that we have with a certain company is a really good one. It's mutually beneficial. They're young. They're going to be listening to us as we give them feedback because we're this older company. And then 2 years into the relationship, not a single feature that you put forward has been executed upon. And it's just interesting to see that basically what you're having to do here is sell this idea back to the company.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing I would point out with that, and that's part of the reason I have the communication section is and I don't know about this specific example, but you really want to make sure, think about who you're talking to, right? Because a lot of companies will sell that vision, but if you're only talking to the account executive and the CSM or the customer relationship manager, there's a possibility that a lot of your feedback never really gets back to the product team, right? So I think that's one reason I wanted to highlight that is you really want to make sure that your communication is getting to the product team. And then to your point, presenting it in a way that makes it easy for them to understand the business value as it relates to you, but also to how it would relate to their broader customer base and help them sell more. And the more you can do that, it does two things. It helps them this is research they're gonna have to do anyway. They're busy. So if you do that for them, then that makes it easier for them to push it forward in their process for consideration. But then it also gives them that validation to work with. But then I would add though that kind of where I had the one business versus the market. I mean, there is the possibility that the reality is that what you're looking for when they look at their market, doesn't rise enough to get into the roadmap. So sometimes that is the case. And that's part of the reason I really highlighted never counting on these features. They'll talk about working with you, but if it's not in a written contract, signed document that says that they will deliver X feature by this date or else, then that's part of the reason I say never to count on it, because that happens. Even if they agree with you, even if they want to do those features, sometimes it just gets pushed back for various reasons for years. So.
All right, good. Any other questions for Brian or any other feedback or comments?
No, just thank you.
Yeah, hi, Marshall. Good to see you here.
Nice to see you.
Yeah. Michael, I see you're here. Welcome. Any feedback, questions, comments? I know you've certainly dealt with some positive and probably not so positive vendor aspects and relationships in your role.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, this was interesting. A little bit, beyond the scope of what I do. So I was just kind of being a fly on the wall, listening in. So it is very interesting. So thank you, Brian, for sharing.
Yeah.
We have a whole procurement team here at Blue Cross where I can kind of like, I can be involved or more or less as I want to. And we have like category managers. And so we've got a guy that helps all of IT, and I can just say, okay, here's my budget. Here's what I'm looking for in a deal. And then he'll go do the wrangling. And so I don't have to,
Right.
for the larger, more complex contracting agreements, that's super nice to have a guy in your corner that has a lot of experience dealing with procurement issues and these managed service providers or different types of contracts and stuff. And then he also helps work through legal. And so that's nice. And then for the smaller stuff, I'm just kind of like, I got this, hold my beer, but so, but anyway, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, hopefully it's helpful. But yeah, I mean, one thing too, as I think about that, and that's part of the reason, like procurement, that's almost its own whole presentation, talking about the whole procurement side of it. But one thing that I've seen a lot of that I think is a good thing to keep in mind is that a lot of companies, if they focus too much on features, and this can happen, it's kind of related, right? Where you're looking at just going by features and kind of picking your vendors and overlooking all the other aspects of that product or what they offer, right? This kind of goes back to the resources as well. So a lot of companies, and this came up even in the training I was at with Jeff, with somebody talking about this with IT software, that they went into it looking for software to do what they needed, right? And the software didn't do everything exactly out of the box, so to speak, as they needed. So they spent a lot of time working with them, making sure they could do everything the way they did it. And then over time, as they implemented it, they realized that they were backing out of the way all these customizations and kind of workarounds they did to use the software, and that the out of the box was actually good best practice, right? So I think a lot of times there's opportunities that are overlooked to kind of step out of your world a little bit and look at the resources a vendor has to offer, work with them a little bit, and see if there's a different way of approaching how you do things that can allow you to get more value out of the software than you thought, right? You're thinking, if you want to use it, get it to do what you need to do, but it may offer some suite of functionality and stuff to do things in a different way that you haven't even thought of, right? And so I think that's something I would definitely encourage people to think about as well.
Yeah, I've seen more than a few times where we bought an enterprise like level application, and then we bent it to our will and added all these customizations instead of changing our process to more of a standardized the way the system works. And then we ran into problems later, and then they would forklift it out after 3 to 5 years, and then they would just do it again. And after a couple of times, I think they finally started changing direction. They're like, maybe we need to re-examine our processes instead of just trying to have a system accommodate us. So I think that was a good point there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that all the time where it's kind of like taking what's given to you, right? And I think a lot of times those processes that you have are important to your business, and so it's not changing things that are important, but a lot of times there's opportunities to do things that you're not even thinking about when you look at the full suite of functionality that you're purchasing. So I think there's that as well. There's standardizing to do something more standard, but also just what does all this stuff do? What am I getting for my money? What are all the things I can do with it? And then you may find there's a bunch of stuff you can do that you weren't even thinking about as well, right?
Right.
So again, I've just seen that so much. I guess I just reiterate that because I've seen that so much where customers, I look at what customers are doing with the product and I see the gaps, and sometimes they're real gaps, and it's always frustrating as a product manager because I want to fill those gaps. But then also seeing so many customers that don't take advantage. One that comes to mind that still sticks with me is when I was at Cougar Mountain, because a lot of times getting stuff into the product is a very difficult process. It takes a lot of time. There's a lot of competing factors, so it's hard to get things in the actual core product, right? But I remember a customer had an issue. I'm talking about the business value. I was working with him, and I figured out that he had this issue that was painful in a small business. And as the way I remember it, if I could solve it with the product, it's going to save him 20, 30 hours a week. Like, that's how significant it was to him. And again, a small business, that's not a minor thing, right? And so I looked at it, and as I understood it, I realized that there was a way to solve his problem with the product today, right? And it was a matter of taking one of the reports and making a minor tweak, just basically dragging it. This is Crystal Reports was the technology, just dragging it filled out onto the report. And, because I understood how all the data worked and how everything lived in the software. And if he did that, then this report would give him what he needed to have this dramatic impact. And I was excited about it, and I called him, and I'm like, yeah, I figured out a solution to your problem. You're gonna love it. And he's, oh, great. I'm like, yeah, you just open a report. And he's like, oh, stop you there. No, I'm serious. It's easy. You open a report and you just drag this field over and save it. And he's like, oh, I'm not a technical person. Stop there. And I'm like, wait, but this will save you 20 hours a week. And he's like, I'm not a developer. And it wouldn't go anywhere. And I just was flabbergasted. And that was, that is that example where this guy could have had huge benefit, and it just would take with the tools he had at his fingertips, right? So,
right.
So yeah, that's
that is funny. That's funny. So in your experience, do you believe, so this, I might be naive thinking this way, but like, I'm looking for vendors that could provide long-term partnerships, right? That really want to help me achieve my goals. And I understand there's a bit of a yin and yang where they're trying to field information from me. Hey, give us your strategic goals and your business goals, and we can align our product to that. And that makes sense to me. But also you're feeding them info, intel that they could use to upsell you or whatever. Do you feel like, obviously salesmen are interested in making sales, but do you feel like there's still businesses today that you can have forge a relationship with to make meaningful impact on a company? Or is it really like, it's really just all sales pitch, and you should just be more adversarial, don't give them anything, make the negotiations difficult as possible? What's your experience? Because I only have the one, right? In my role here, we have a set vendor list. Onboarding vendors is very difficult. Yeah. Some vendors, some vendors, usually the smaller businesses, you tend to do, like when I've worked with Jeff, he does a fantastic job, right? Yeah. Like a real partnership. But these larger companies are like, oh, you don't, you're not doing $10 million with us. We could care less about you.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
I think that the small business model is a good one, right? And I think that's true. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is communication. A small business has that ability, as you interact with them, for your the entire business to understand what you're doing and to react to it. A lot of times, part of it isn't the motive of the company, but it's just they get so big that your feedback doesn't get to the right people, and so you don't see that translate into product. I would say that on one hand, I think the software industry with the subscription model and the mindset of most vendor companies is around this idea of shared value. Some of it is marketing, but a lot of it is genuine, that they really do think of their business model as working with their customers to help them be more successful. I think that's genuine, but it does, there's just the challenges of scale, and that's one reason I wanted to highlight that. That's what they want to do, but you're one company and they're trying to figure out how to do that for an entire market. So how much they can partner with you as an individual company, I think that's where a lot of times this whole idea breaks down. And so I think you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt and realize that a lot of what they're saying, it's marketing on one hand. People are, a lot of time, my experience is that people are typically genuine and that they really do sincerely want you to succeed. Developers across the board, right? That the thing that motivates them is knowing that they're helping customers, people are using their software. I think that's
Yeah.
what happens. But the reality is that, you know, I guess the reality I'd say is a lot of that's marketing.
Okay.
So I wouldn't put a lot of stock into it, or a lot of, I would, like I said, I wouldn't make my plans based on this idea that this vendor is going to work with me to make it happen. I'd
Sure.
make my plans based on what they do for me now, and then see what they do
Gotcha.
for me in the future, and then go from
Okay.
there.
Yeah, and I'll add one more quick thing. Listen, Brian, you and I talked about this a little bit earlier this week, and it's kind of funny because I'm being interviewed on Friday as part of a blog post that's going to come out on this. It's the idea of cooperation versus collaboration. And when I think about what you're talking about with that, Michael, it's the nature of the dynamics of the relationship that you're entered into. And based on your sourcing strategy and what's in scope and having some of those prerequisites figured out. And I think, Brian, you and I could probably collaborate on a completely different presentation in the future around the procurement and some of the things you and I talked about earlier too, right? And some of those things, but to not start the relationship on an adversarial nature, I think is a good thing. And we've hopefully seen more of the marketplace trend away from that. And then the question is especially if you're working with a larger company that's maybe more in a one-to-many type of a situation, I think Brian's right. There's probably going to be some things that you aren't going to be able to do a whole lot with around that. You've got to be part of the community and figuring out ways to make those connections. But I think if you're looking at that from a cooperation standpoint, cooperation in that context of supplier management really means that you're working together so that both of you can achieve your own needs in a way that's greater than what you could do by doing things on your own. Whereas shifting that over to collaboration or partnership really means that you're working together so that you both can achieve mutually beneficial needs together that you couldn't do by not working together, right? It's that next step of that maturity of that relationship. And I think that that's really something important to be able to recognize depending on the nature and scope of the relationship and how important that maturity is for you both to be successful, and looking for those dynamics and those signs up front and trying to set things off in a positive way, I think can make a big difference and go a long way toward getting to that point. And that'll, that'll carry them forward, hopefully, where it's not like you come back in 2 years, like Josh was talking about, and then they don't want to talk to you anymore. They don't want to listen to you. You don't want to see that happen, obviously.
So do you feel like it would be better to work with a like say Workday, right? They're a big enterprise human resource, human capital management, ERP firm. Like Brian said, they're probably more interested in entire segments, commercial market, insurance or whatever, right? In verticals. So, you're probably not going to get a lot of traction with them, but if I work with a managed partner or something who might be a smaller firm, still might be, relatively large to me, but I might be able to get more of that partnership time and effort and get more attention if that's what I'm, or one-to-one relationship versus the 1 to a billion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that it's just, and that's, the adversarial thing, I've seen this a lot where customers try to be adversarial and kind of forcing the hand of the vendor. And I just don't think that gets you much value to take that approach. Obviously, when you get to pricing, you definitely want to negotiate, of course, right? And get all the discounts you can and all that. So that's obviously valuable. But then, what are you trying to accomplish with it? Is it really worth it to just nickel and dime the vendor? Or if you're not getting the value, then go with someone else, right? But then once you work with them, I mean, like I said, most of the people internally are motivated to help you, and adversarial just turns them off and makes them not interested, right? However, build your contacts, even with a Workday, even with a big company. If you can get access to the right people, you can influence roadmap, right? If you can get a contact, the dev team, product team, and you become a resource that helps them prioritize and research and stuff like that, that's how you influence them, not by being adversarial.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
So real quick, everyone, we're at past time, and I want to do a couple of announcements before we close out and stop the recording. And then if folks need to run, certainly understand, appreciate all of you being here. And if folks want to stick around and have a few more questions or just to visit, we can certainly make time to do that. But real quick, I just want to go ahead and make a couple of announcements. Let me share my screen. So first thing that I want to share is just some upcoming opportunities to continue through your improvement journey through some training. I'm going to continue to be offering my strategic leader training package and have a couple of classes, direct plan and improve, as well as digital and IT strategy coming up in May and June. There's also some other upcoming ITSM Academy public training opportunities listed here. So if you're interested in any of those, let me know. I've got a discount code for those. And then I always like to share about some other things that are going on in our community. Our next meeting will be on May 25th, and I'm going to be working on a presentation called Putting the Value in Value Stream Mapping, and I will be leading that with a couple of potential collaborators and friends, so stay tuned for that, and I'll be announcing that shortly. All of our meetings since we went virtual in September have been recorded, and they're out on the link here for the YouTube channel, and that's posted as well as on our Meetup and on our LinkedIn. A couple of other of our partner groups, the Treasure Valley Agile community has monthly meetups. Those are out on Meetup to find here as well. And then Project Management Institute Western Idaho chapter also has monthly chapter meetings and other events that are worthwhile. They just did their professional development day in March, and that was a fantastic session, and I was glad to be able to have the opportunity to be a part of that. And then another YouTube channel, for those of you that were here in October and were able to hear Greg Sanker, who's the lead author for the Change Enablement Practice Guide. They do a weekly presentation on Friday mornings called Keep the Learning On, and all of those are also recorded on the blog and YouTube channel, and they're very much worthwhile to check out. So I want to encourage all of you to take a look at those opportunities, and please, if you haven't already, encourage folks to connect with us on Meetup and our Boise ITSM LinkedIn group. We had several folks who did register to attend today that weren't able to make it. Hopefully they'll be able to watch the recording, and we'll continue to spread the word about our group. Thanks all for being here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And that's done. Appreciate all of you being here. And